Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Well, hello, and welcome to episode 25 of Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and in this particular podcast, I will be talking about, do you communicate? And it's not whether you say hi or bye, but sometimes, how do you say hi or bye? You know, my observation has been that as communication technology becomes more and more diverse, becomes more and more layered. I'm talking about, you have text message, you have instant messaging, you have Instagram, Snapchat, all of these various forms of communication. And oftentimes we communicate our messages, and it's not necessarily a way in which, like, you're talking to someone as if you walked up to them and shook their hand and said hello or goodbye. And this was a very interesting idea that I had read. There was a job recruiter, a person that does the hiring for a particular company, and one of the things that they gauge their new prospective employees is how well they have mastered the art of small talk. Now, for those of you who are unaware, small talk is basically just chit-chat. You walk up to somebody and you just say, you know, how's the weather, and then you go from there. Well, there's an art to that. And when it comes to meeting people, quite often it's that art of chit-chat is what allows that person to begin to engage in a conversation with you and therefore develop a type of connection. It's amazing. There are people that do it well, and there are those that are very uncomfortable with doing that. So, and those that aren't very comfortable with doing that, I'm sort of reaching out to those individuals and wondering, because here's something that happens. When you're sending a text message, let's say, the person who is receiving that message is reading it through their own filter. So whether it's a message that could be you're sending it because maybe you're upset about something and you're wanting them to get the idea of what it is you're thinking. Well, if they're reading it, they may be on the same page with you, but it is definitely not the same thing as if they're talking to you. Now, if we move forward and think about the technology of Skype, where somebody actually sees your face and you have the reaction, everything is in real time, that is a little different because you are actually having an interaction with someone. But I'm talking about those that are that text message, and this is something that's available to most people if you have a cell phone. It's those individuals that may wonder about the breakdown of communication, about what's the message that's being sent. And I have talked about this in the past. It's how you communicate, you know, how you signal your intentions. And that is a very, very interesting idea. If you've not had the experience of being terribly misunderstood, then it's probably not something that bothers you. But when you think about the possibilities of being misunderstood, then you have to wonder why one wouldn't want to represent themselves. And I'm talking about doing that in person. So it's about picking up the phone and actually calling someone. It is also about developing the art of small talk, chit-chat, because it's in those types of skills, that linguistic skill, in which you learn how to command your space. And when you learn to be interesting to others in that form, you can learn to command a room. And I'm speaking to you from the standpoint of thinking about this going forward. Having influence on other people can be a very powerful thing for you and your experience to be leaders, to being good communicators. If you have a social cause that is very important to you, obviously these other forms of media can get your message out fairly quickly to a large number of people. But once those people have come together and they're all in one place, now having the skill of talking to them is what's going to cement this. And this is why I suggest that learning to communicate with people verbally, mastering your oral skills, is quite an art. Now, there are many people out there that do it extremely well. Politicians, and I'm using the word not as a pejorative, but politicians are individuals who have to learn how to master their oratory skills, because it's in talking with people that you can convince people of your idea, about your leadership ability, your skills. And if you'll look at those that don't seem to have a good command of their words, they're the individuals that often tend to lose out, because it's not just about being perceived as somebody that doesn't speak very well, but it's about being able to communicate your ideas. And if you don't do that very well, it's very difficult to rally support for your position, for your concepts. So that's an individual who we tend to look up to with a lot of respect. The President of the United States, someone who happens to be a very good orator. And because the position requires it, you have to be a good communicator. And in a position like that, they're not always well liked, but they do tend to learn how to work a crowd. And you do have to have a bit of a thick skin, because not everybody's going to like you, and you may get heckled. Another person that seems to be very good at speaking are comedians. They are obviously the center of attention in a room, and many comedians if you've ever seen a comedian get heckled, oftentimes they're very able to come back and put somebody in their place. If you have somebody that's shouting out insults and things from the crowd and the comedian up on stage, they don't get rattled. They're able to command that room. And that's why the oratory skills. But as I had started out by sharing that learning to communicate, learning to share your feelings and do it verbally with someone is a very powerful thing. I would imagine that if you are interested in someone and you're able to have that FaceTime with them, that one-on-one contact, you would probably be in a much better position than someone who is just sending a text message to that same individual. So think of it as maybe as competition. And if you're good at being persuasive, you may be able to capture the love of your life, because it's something that you've learned and you've prepared for and that you may have mastered. So there's a thought. Anyhow, I'm going to take a break, and I'll be right back after this.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's GSMCpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Well, hello, and welcome to episode 25 of Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. And the topic in general is, do you communicate? And something that I'm going to swing into is I'm going to talk about sexuality. That is a big piece of communication between a couple. Why? It's because when you're having sex, it's not a problem. When you're not having sex, it becomes a problem. And communication is a big part of why you will or will not have sex. I can guarantee it. is one of those things that if you're not communicating, then sex tends to be something you desire, but you're going to have to figure out a way to get through the breakdown of communication. And when the communication is great, sex seems fun. It seems like it's very doable. And there's a lot of things that can derail the communication. But the sex in and of itself, why is it important? Because what it signals is it signals vulnerability to your partner and welcomeness and acceptance. And if you can imagine the mindset to be sexual with your partner, the mindset that you have to be in, because again, there was a give and take nature to the sexual component of a relationship, as it would be for any couple. And what applies here is the mindset that sex is pleasurable, and being able to have that with your partner, the pleasurable experiences, it's wonderful. It's a great feeling. And I hope any and everyone can experience that in their lives. But it requires you of investing yourself. And that's where the vulnerability comes in. And sex is definitely something that taps into your vulnerability bone. When you can't be vulnerable, then sex can be very, very difficult to achieve, because then what you possibly are doing is you're putting it upon your partner to read your mind. And that is not a place that I would want to be. We've talked about mind reading in other podcasts, so I'm not going to necessarily go off on that tangent. But I'm talking about sex and why people want it. It's because it feels good. And in this part about you communicating has to do with sharing the vulnerability, wanting that for your partner, pleasing your partner, and having that. And if you're not, then it's about, okay, figuring out what we can do. Now, in the last segment, I talked about communication and, social media and how that impacts it, and how when you can do it face to face, you seem to be able to convey your feelings, how you can work a room, and how you can be much more convincing. And I think this is an aspect that, wouldn't you be motivated if you thought you could experience some sexual pleasure? I think you would. So being vulnerable and communicating your feelings, being present. Oh, and that's another wonderful thing about sexuality, being able to have that experience, being present with your partner. And, it's intimacy, and it's something that you and your partner have. The other parts, as far as what we can do, is you need to ask your partner what they're feeling, what it is that they want. Again, that's part of the vulnerability. And by opening that conversation, then you get to share what it is that you want and how you're feeling. And it's amazing about how well these experiences will feel when you've had a good, pleasurable sex. People that aren't having that in their relationship, and it is not exclusive, but I'm saying that people that don't have necessarily a good sexual experience, there is tension in that relationship. I heard an interesting story, and I don't know how true it is, but I'm just going to communicate this to you. And it was a study that was created. I can't validate the study because I don't have it in front of me, but I just remember hearing it, that in the first 3 months of a relationship, people have the most sex when they've decided to become sexually active than at any other time in their relationship. So what I think the statistic was trying to point out was that when people begin being sexual in their relationship, that the first 3 months, it happens a lot. And then after the people have been together for a while, then it sort of dwindles down into this other number that just seems to not really match the desire. And it's at that point in time, it's about compatibility. It's about making time for it, and so on and so forth. So communicating your need. But I'm suggesting, hey, you can beat the average, whatever that conversation was. You can have a lot more physical intimacy with your partner by thinking about these kinds of things, communicating, talk to your partner about what they want, and doing those kinds of things, spending that kind of quality time. And, I know with busy people, it's difficult to sometimes make that happen, but it becomes one of those things of actually planning it. And for those people who like to be spontaneous, it certainly probably throws cold water on that spontaneity thing, because you like to do it whenever and whatever. But if you're not having it at all, scheduling it seems to be the best thing that you can do. Now, there are some people that are wonderful about making schedules, and think about that. put that in your planner. When you've become very busy in your life and you're scheduling other things like doctor's appointments and well, I mean, that's an example of something you got to schedule. Boy, does that cost you if you don't make the appointment. They cancel you or you get canceled and have to pay a fee if you don't make it. So schedule time for your sex. It's also about communicating with your partner and letting them know how important they are. Bring the conversation to the table. That's one that I think some people, because of the vulnerability aspect of it, people feel, I know oftentimes partners feel like they're going to be rejected. I know that women often feel that, if a man wants it, he'll approach her and that he should be the aggressor. That's very understood. I know there's a lot of that in our culture. But I think gender roles are shifting and that women have as much opportunity to ask and be vulnerable about asking as men do. Like I say, I've talked about it, that these gender roles are changing. And as they shift, we oftentimes find ourselves kind of confused as to what it is we want to do and how to ask and is it appropriate. So we're just going to have to try it. It's going to have to be a trial and error. You're going to have to experiment with it and see where you fall. And if you happen to make a mistake with someone, then just own up to it and say, hey, you know what? I made a mistake. Let's try to start over. Let's approach this from a different direction. And I think most people would be sensitive and understanding about that. And if they're not, then it's probably not somebody you want to be with. Move on, find somebody who's more your speed or more your temperament. So there's always an opportunity to do that. Another thing about sex, make it fun, make it interesting. And the thing is, don't have sex be a chore. That's the one thing that's going to take the life out of a sexual experience, is making it seem like it's a chore, because remember, we're at a really vulnerable space when this is what you're doing. And your partner is obviously going to be reading you for signals as to whether this is okay, whether that's okay. And when that part about it seeming like it's drudgery happens, that is like having a conversation stopper. I mean, things can stop right in the middle, and how awkward and embarrassing that's going to be. And if you're one of these individuals that's experienced that, now you've got to do some damage control. Because if you don't get this thing back on track, then it's derailed, and for some people, it's over and done. Guys use it; it's a penalty flag there. And I have had conversations with people that have experienced that, where all of a sudden there was something that came out in the conversation while they were being intimate, and it probably had to do with something they didn't like, and it got kind of ugly in the conversation, and forgot that this was supposed to be a good experience, and it just stopped it cold. Again, that's embarrassing. And it's, what do you do at that point? I think you own up to it, acknowledge the awkwardness of the moment, and dial it back a bit. And want to be in the place of reassuring your partner that, hey, it's okay. We can get past this. And hopefully something with a sense of humor is right around the corner to kind of rescue that situation. But if that's not the case, then, we kind of have to dial this thing back down. And I think in the case of what to do, just hug your partner, hold on to him. And if there's something in the way of, maybe you need to make an apology. Hey, it's okay. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do this. And it can come from either partner, the man or the woman. It doesn't matter. It's, it's your moment, and it's there for you to figure out what happened. But that's what you do in a situation like that. You don't let your partner run off and have to be in their own, to deal with this by themselves. Because remember, we started with vulnerability. And if you allow those vulnerable moments to happen, and it transitions into these ugly, awkward things, then trying to repair those, becomes very, very testy and very trying, and it's going to bend you and contort you in all sorts of ways. So I think the way to transition that is you embrace, you hug, and maybe not even have to say a lot. just say that everything's going to be okay. We're going to work through this, and maybe even try to be a little lighthearted about it. To say, hey, we can try this another time. So that's just something on the end about how you transition an awkward sexual moment there. And another thing to think about, hey, is what do you do after you've had sex? Well, I think it's important that you stay connected. There's still communication, and that you do something together as a couple. And that sort of reinforces, what happened. Whether you go out for coffee or go out to eat, certainly while you're laying there to embrace and, have a small chat. So, but there's also some physiological things that go on with men after men have had sex and they've climaxed. There's chemical things that happen in a man's body that makes them relax, so they tend to want to sleep. Women don't necessarily operate that way. So understanding the physiology and what happens to each other, that's an important aspect. But transitioning those moments from the sexual, being sexual and then what to do after, I think it's important to be able to bond and continue with that. And that's what makes the experience better. That's why being vulnerable and having that's the reward, because you can stay connected in that. So that's a biggie. So if you haven't had a good sexual experience or don't seem to be able to figure out what to do after, that's what you do. You stay connected. That's why you want to bond with your person. You talk to them, you hug, you hold, and then you try to and you look to do things afterwards, so that it's not about just using your partner. Because I'll tell you what, if that's how your partner's feeling used, then what they're going to do is your partner is going to find somebody else who's going to make them feel special. And that's usually what happens. You may know somebody that's done that, or you may be the person that's done it yourself. So, hey, there's the proof right there. Well, and next up, I'm going to talk about, and do you keep secrets after this break?
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Well, hello there, and we're back. I'm John Johnson, your host of Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. And at the end of the last segment, I said I was going to talk about secrets. Do you have secrets? And I'm talking about the kind of secrets of, do you have a secret bank account that you didn't tell your significant other about? And why is that? Is it because you can't trust them with the money? Now, I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek, but what I'm wanting to relate to is, can you share your secrets? There are those things that happen to us in life. Now, I'm going to suggest that I'm going to, being a little lighthearted there, but there are things that have happened to us in life where it has affected us, our thinking. It affects our trust issues. And if you're a young person or it happened to you as a young person where you were molested or you were betrayed or something of that nature, which is it weighs on you, something like that your partner doesn't know about. And I'm suggesting if, you have to get comfortable in order to talk about these things. But these kinds of things affect you and they affect your relationship. Here's why. Because when you have a deep, dark secret, it is driving your behavior. It causes you to behave in ways that oftentimes are very perceptible to the person who doesn't necessarily know the secret per se. And it causes them to wonder, for example, when you have trust issues with people, it will cause you to be very guarded. It affects your vulnerability. You don't necessarily engage in topics that may be very risky, which then makes you seem evasive. And that happens a lot to people that have trust issues. So how do you recognize that? If you're a person who is trying to have a conversation with another, and you're trying to have a conversation that is more than just below the surface, but really getting at how do we move forward on things, that person may have trust issues. And it could be deep-seated. They may not realize, so I'm kind of going a little further here. They may not realize that it's a trust issue for them. But it is certainly affecting their behavior, their ability to be able to communicate something intimate and important to you. And when you're trying to talk to someone about something important like that and they don't seem to be able to go very far, I'm suggesting that there is a strong possibility that it has to do with trust issues. And where do we gain those types of experiences? Usually in childhood. So if they're a person who has been on their own or has had to rely on themselves most of the time, and you're trying to be in a relationship with that person may not allow you to do much for them because they've never learned to trust that another person is going to be there for them. And those are some of the clues, some of the keys to being able to figure out how, what another person's behavior is about. And because of that, when you are trying to, say, mine them for information, they may clam up because they don't want to share. And it may also be something as simple as they don't realize that they're affected that way. They don't realize how they are coming off to you. And this might be the first time that somebody with a perception of what's going on can share with them, hey, you're being awfully closed down right now. And is there a possibility that something happened? And when you get to know somebody and somebody's background and their lifestyle, when people begin, when they introduce themselves, sometimes they may allude to these kinds of things. But I think it's important to really be a good listener when you're introducing yourself to somebody. I mean, it's not okay to just talk all the time. It's really good to be a good listener about what's going on for somebody else, and you may begin to get clues as to how this person is going to be. Now, we're attracted to people for all kinds of reasons. And, being a social worker in your relationship is something that you take on. And you may find many things to like about that other person, and therefore it may be worth your investment. But understand that when you become a social worker in your relationship, sometimes you're taking on and I'm going to use the word, you're taking on a fixer-upper. And that could have all kinds of implications. So whether you're a man or a woman, I mean, if you take a person as they are and expect whatever growth, whatever things you do together, if the person seems like they're an individual who is open to growing and learning about themselves and embraces that, then that's something that can be a wonderful way to bond because you may have some of the same kinds of issues. And therefore you help each other. That's what relationships do. It gives you an opportunity to be that, to experience yourself, and with the right kind of partner, it's wonderful because you discover things and you make new memories, and then you go forward. But when you're just being a social worker in your relationship, then you run the risk of just being that. And sometimes it's very hard to enjoy the relationship because it doesn't seem to have progress because you keep getting stumped by these issues that come up, and they can be long lasting. And if people have unresolved issues, then one of the things that happens is they may not know how to be in counseling. They may not, and that takes a while. So if you're with somebody who's been there, then quite possibly that may be a good fit. If you haven't, or if this person hasn't been in that space, then it could be very challenging. So I'm just alerting you to that. But I started out by talking about it being a secret, but this is sort of morphed into looking at understanding what's in somebody else's background and to being able to read that and use that as a launch point for how your relationship is going to look to them. And for yourself, realize that sometimes sharing your own experience happens to be a good way of getting someone else to open up. So you have to be vulnerable first and expect that or want that and allow that vulnerability to happen. And you think that's a really good way of finding out how another person is. And they may be able to share some compassion for you and what you've gone through, and you do it for them. That's a beautiful coming together. And that's what I have to say about secrets. If you have them, are you willing to share them? Hopefully you're with someone that you can share. I'm John Johnson. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. Thank you for listening. And until next time.